done a lot. And as I said, on a national level, they're talking about doing the things that we've already done. So we continue to lead and try and answer the moment as it occurs.
The state's legislative session closing in a flurry. Lawmakers staying late on the last day to move on some key issues impacting New Yorkers. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. The 2022 session ending with a mad dash from lawmakers, passing several pivotal bills, keeping them at the Capitol past Thursday. The Senate working past midnight into Friday, the Assembly working through the day on Friday. Now, just to name a few of the measures, major legislation approved in both houses, including 10 bills on gun legislation, answering calls for change following deadly violence in both Buffalo and Texas. Then a series of measures back that would further strengthen New York's existing reproductive rights. They also passed the John Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York, protecting against racial discrimination during state elections. Well, many agreements were made. Not everything, though, on the agenda did get tackled. I'm joined right now for a review of this year's legislative session by Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley and State Senator Pamela Helming, ranking committee member out of the 54th District in Western New York. I want to thank both of you for joining us. I know it was a long night, long few days there at the Capitol to wrap this up. First, I want to get your reaction to what did get done, especially that 10-bill package on further restrictions on gun ownership, further solidifying of New York's abortion laws. Senator Helming, start with you. New York already had some of the most progressive laws in the country on both of these. They get even broader. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so my thoughts in general on the session, I think the primary concern for me and for the Republican conference is that we really didn't do anything to address the top two issues that we hear from our constituents. And that has to do with affordability, the cost of living in New York, the cost of gas, trying to put food on the table, the cost of paying your utility bills. We did not address affordability. Instead, we continue to pass budgets and take measures that just spend more and tax more. And I want to say the second, but it is a top priority for so many people, is public safety. We did not go far enough in holding criminals accountable and doing more to protect our citizens, especially our school children.
Minority Leader Barkley over in the Assembly, similar thoughts there?
Yeah, first of all, let me apologize because I'm working on about 2 hours of sleep. It's no way to run state government, unfortunately, but that's just the circumstance we're in. But absolutely, I think the senator nailed it right on the head. I mean, the number one thing we want to do in the state government, I think, is to keep our citizens safe. And we have a rash of increased violent crime, not only in New York City, but throughout the state. And it's very simple what we need to do. We need to do bail reform. We need to change, raise the age. And unfortunately, instead of that, we've been focusing on issues like abortion and gun control when we already have the most expansive abortion laws in the country. We already have some of the most stringent gun control laws in the country. We ought to be looking to change the trajectory the state, unfortunately, has been on too long by making it more affordable, make it safe for citizens. And unfortunately, either the majorities in either the Senate or the Assembly were willing to do that.
Do you feel, though, that this package of gun laws may at least address some crime in the aspect of potentially stopping a mass shooting? Assemblymember Barkley.
Unfortunately, I don't. There's a lot of issues, and we were always willing to work in a bipartisan way to try to prevent these terrible tragedies that happened, the shooting in New York City and the shooting out in Buffalo. In fact, we even had a task force that met or was supposed to put in place 2 years ago that never met on mass shootings. So, I'm just questioning some of this stuff. I think is more feel-good type of legislation, but ultimately, whether that would prevent future tragedies like this happening in the future, I think is very much debatable.
Senator Helming, were there any aspects of this package of bills that you think at least you could get behind some of those reforms?
I have to say that I agree with what the leader said, that there were so many issues, so many bills in this package that were nothing more than feel good. And just like the leader, I'm operating on a couple hours of sleep here, but one of the things that is just infuriating me as a state senator and also as a mother and a grandmother is that these are feel-good packages. They don't do anything to protect our kids. They don't do anything to protect people who are visiting a grocery store, in a house of worship. For instance, one of the bills that was passed last night, as an example, is a feel-good measure. It's if somebody makes a mass threat, they threaten to go into school and blow it up. If they threaten to go into a house of worship and shoot it up, or a grocery store, or whatever it is, that's a Class B misdemeanor under the bill that was passed last night. And Leader Barkley brought up, we didn't do anything for bail reform. So Class B under the bail reform laws passed by the Senate and Assembly Democrats, that's a catch and release. That person would be issued an appearance ticket. What we put forward, in the spirit of working collaboratively to come up with real solutions to these problems, is that one, it should be a bail eligible offense, and two, there should be a mandate that that person undergo a psychiatric evaluation. So again, I am just sickened that I don't think that we did enough to hold criminals accountable and protect innocent victims.
Minority Leader, the bail reform issue is just one that does not seem to be going away, but there are supermajorities in both the Senate and the Assembly with the Democrats. Do you see any movement happening on that, despite what you're saying?
Well, very sadly, no. But ultimately, as you know, it's an election year this year, and I think New Yorkers recognize the concern about their own safety when they feel concerned about just going out on the streets. So I'm very optimistic from a political perspective that people had enough, and I think they're going to put a real dent in the majorities this November because of issues like crime, because of issues like affordability. If I may, I just want to go back quickly to what Senator Helmut said, which is spot on about these feel-good gun laws. Even the majority leader in the Assembly said last night that she was going to vote for it, not because she thought these laws were going to be effective, but because they were feel good. And she said, if make people feel good, we're going to pass those laws. So it's not just us Republicans are saying that. Even the second number 2 in the state assembly said that. So again, we want to have solutions to these very serious problems. And unfortunately, I think the other side of the aisle wasn't willing to do that in this case.
You mentioned there talking about it being an election season, and we're just coming up on the precipice of it. The primary is going to be held later this month. Senator, all these issues that you're talking about, do you think these are winning issues in New York State? We know that some pundits have said that these lines that have been redrawn, especially in the Senate, that they may be favorable to the GOP. Do you think you can win with these arguments?
Absolutely. I think that the Republicans in both the Senate and the Assembly, we are on the right side of the issue. What we're hearing consistently from constituents across the state is about affordability. They are just so concerned about, how they put that gas in their car to get to work. They're so concerned about how do they put the food on the table. I have so many people in my district still calling me about the cost of the utility bills. That's what's important to people. This skyrocketing inflation under one-party control from the federal government all the way down through the state government, people want to change. They want to restore balance to state government. They want their voices to be heard.
Minority Leader, less than 30 seconds, sir. You get the last word.
Well, again, I don't want to sound too much like a broken record, but I think it's worth mentioning. The two biggest things that we're hearing from our constituency is affordability and crime. And I'm disappointed that neither of those issues were addressed during this session. But again, this is an election year, and so hopefully the voters get turnout and vote, and they want to vote for change.
Assemblyman Will Barkley, State Senator Pamela Helming, we appreciate both of your times today. Get some sleep. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Still ahead, we're taking a closer look at some of the specifics in the package of gun laws, how they measure up to what's already on the books. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. Gun legislation has been at the forefront of debate since the very beginning of the year, and it only ramped up in the final weeks of the session. Both houses passing a comprehensive list of new measures. We're going to take a look at some of the bills that passed in the Senate and the Assembly. Topping the list, the move to increase the age to buy semi-automatic weapons went up from 18 to 21. Micro-stamping of ammunition, strengthening of background checks. Also, a more descriptive definition of the term firearm to address modern technology and weapons. And even a measure to regulate the sale of body armor and protective vests to the general public. There were several additional measures taken when it comes to regulating guns. All of this flying in the front of the call at the federal level to also take action. Pleased to be joined right now by State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, represents the current 26th district in New York City. Senator, we appreciate your time today. You sponsored two of these bills regarding background checks and body armor regulation. First, I want to get to that first one. When it comes to the background checks, how does your bill already enhance what's already on the books?
Yeah, the bill focuses on the activities of gun dealers. So it's intended to ensure that gun dealers are, first of all, people who work there are properly trained in their obligations to perform background checks and to keep control of their gun inventory. And it also ensures that their inspections. One of the big problems we have with gun violence in the U.S. is that while virtually all guns start out as legally manufactured guns in the hands of a legitimate dealer, many of them are lost from that inventory. Many of them are stolen, and they find their way into the illegal gun market. And so we think by more tightly regulating dealers and making them, keep the proper records and be accountable for their, their product, and inspecting that to ensure that that's happening, that will reduce the prevalence of illegal guns in our communities throughout the state.
Is there some hope here, too, that, apart from just what's in that law and what these dealers are going to be asked to be doing, so many questions have come up surrounding these shootings. How did somebody walk into a gun store and not have the gun dealer start to ask some major questions about that? Are you hoping with more training that maybe they'll go beyond the law just on the day-to-day basis and maybe ask those questions? What might the intent be behind this purchase?
Yeah, I will say there are two, there are two important policy levers there. The first is, and I think this has been reported on, a bill we passed a few years ago, the Extreme Risk Protection Order, or red flag law, probably should have been operative in the case of the Buffalo shooting because the person in question had engaged in some threatening activity less than a year earlier, and it's unclear why red flag order was not sought and issued in that instance. But had one been in place, then the dealer would have been in a position to do a background check and would have found that person to be not somebody who's legally eligible to purchase the weapon that he purchased legally. But the bill also, the gun dealer legislation also talks about training people who are selling guns to recognize situations where somebody may be buying it with an intent to do harm, and also make sure that they're aware of the potential for straw purchases, where somebody who is legally permitted to purchase a gun is purchasing one for someone else. We remember a while back we had the Webster shooting, where law enforcement was called to and there was a fire, and when firefighters showed up, they were shot by someone who had already been convicted of a felony and done some significant time in prison for that, and had convinced another person to purchase the gun, and then basically she turned it over to him very shortly after purchasing it. So there are ways of identifying that, and so we want to make sure that our dealers are up on their formal obligations. And also I think most gun dealers want to engage in their business honestly and with integrity.
Talk about body armor here. We saw both in the Buffalo shooting, also what happened in Texas, these attackers wearing those protective vests. Why did you feel like it was key to make this change, even though the vest itself, of course, not the weapon?
Right. So the vests body armor has become somewhat more common, particularly in mass shootings where the intent seems to be to kill as many people as possible. Mass shootings are often defined as, shootings that involve, 4 people or 3 people, depending on who's defining them. But the mass shootings that have made the news and really shaken the country have featured people who seem to have a specific intent to go somewhere and keep shooting and harming as many people as possible. And of course, body armor makes that more possible. And we saw in Buffalo that there was off-duty police officers providing security and actually got a shot at the shooter, and the body armor seems to have protected the shooter. And then, unfortunately, that law enforcement officer lost his life, and others did as well. So it's true that body armor is not, of course, harming somebody, but it is becoming increasingly a tool of that. It's more common in these shooters than it had been. The Violence Policy Center in Washington has been tracking that. So we're taking a very modest step here. We are not banning body armor that anybody might possess currently, and we're not even banning the people from acquiring body armor in various ways. But we are restricting the purchase and sale of body armor in New York State. And the exception will be people whose jobs require it. And the bill will go into effect 30 days after it's signed by the governor. And in that period, the Secretary of State's office will come up with a list of those professions.
Senator, a little more than a minute left here. One other thing I wanted to get to. We have the Supreme Court set to decide on New York's concealed carry permit laws. Did that maybe put some impetus behind this package of bills, knowing what might be coming down the line with the conservative bent of this court?
No, I would say that we are constantly looking to improve our laws. And obviously the timing of this was related to what happened in Buffalo and Uvalde. And unfortunately, these incidents are common. But none of these bills are specifically a response to anything we might anticipate from the Supreme Court. Obviously, as someone who supports these restrictions, I think it would be a mistake for the Supreme Court to diminish our ability to protect New Yorkers in the ways that we have. But we will react as necessary when the Supreme Court does whatever it does. And of course, we respect their separate branch of government.
All right, Senator Kavanaugh, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, New York, full steam ahead on recreational cannabis. Coming up, the latest steps on how marijuana will be marketed once it hits shelves in the state. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. There's more movement on the marijuana front in New York. The Cannabis Control Board approving regulations for packaging, labeling, and advertising for recreational use. The regulations including child-resistant packaging, labeling that also clearly states the products contain THC, also limiting marketing to adult-only audiences.
None of this stuff that we're seeing now with cartoons and bright colors, and it's going to have that white background, black print with the universal symbol on there stating that it's for 21 years or over.
A 60-day public comment period for those proposals will begin June 15th. Well, the state's gas tax cap now in effect, offering some modest relief at the pump across New York. The suspension on part of the state's gas tax going to save drivers 16 cents per gallon. Will save drivers a few bucks when they fill up, of course, but depending on where you live, you could save even more. 24 counties initiating their own cents per gallon caps. Experts say being mindful when you travel, that could help too.
It's not worth driving all over town to find a better gas price, but certainly if you're out and about and you want to plan your route, think about where you might be, yeah, you might save 5 to 10 cents more a gallon by doing that.
Every little bit counts. There is going to be still a trickle-down factor on that relief. Some stations selling at what they paid for the gas before those prices got lowered. For gas retailers, the Department of Taxation and Finance says they can apply for tax refunds on any gas they sell after June 1st, but did buy at that higher price. The Attorney General's office still on the lookout, though, for cases of gas price gouging. If you think you're the victim of that, they suggest doing the following when contacting their office. Report the specific increased prices, the dates and the places that you saw those increased prices, and the types of fuel being sold. Also provide copies of sales receipts and photos of the advertised prices if available. And buy only as much fuel as you need. Do not stock up out of fear of a potential future shortage. We'll be back with a final look at the week ahead. If you have a comment or a story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly, and you could also find us on Twitter. Finally, on Empire State Weekly, an extension for New Yorkers to weigh in on the state's scoping plan for climate change. That plan was released back in December, lays out several scenarios on how New York can meet its ambitious climate goals. Public comment period was set to end on Friday, but will now run through the end of the month. A final plan is due by the end of this year, 2022. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. We'll see you again next week. Don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's a full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.